Okay, so I think this is gonna work. I have a little feedback, but hopefully it's not too bad. I was looking at the pivotal response training to promote joint attention, and I did try to find a way to get my voice to be Morgan Freeman's voice, but no luck. So they can be stuck with my voice. So my article choice was using perceptive interest to elicit joint attention behaviors in young children with autism. The theoretical and clinical implications for understanding motivation. The authors were Lori Vismara and Gregory L. Lyons. This article ultimately kind of summarizes a study that utilized pivotal response training, and it was utilizing that with perceptive interest, and it was trying to elicit that joint attention behavior. I chose this article for a multitude of reasons, but honestly, I didn't feel 100% confident with pivotal response treatment, and thought that if I had to get in there and teach it, this would be a good opportunity to learn. I was also very interested in the perceptive interest, using them as a motivator. I think a lot of us who work with students who have autism understand that perceptive interests are there, and they often aren't going away. And the fact that we might be able to use them as a motivator is great, because I think we all know students who have deep interest in Thomas the Train or puzzles or Australia. I mean, it could be anything. This is a peer-reviewed article. We utilized it in class. It was published in 2007, which does not fall within the last 5 years. So I think that's a limit of this study, is that it's maybe perhaps a little dated. Furthermore, there were only 3 young children in the study. They were all roughly 34 months old, nonverbal, on the spectrum. And so there's certainly a small sample size, and that's a limit of the study. This study, what they did was they used a single subject reversal design, where they alternated treatments to examine whether joint attention initiations for social sharing would occur using the PRT in conjunction with perceptive interest stimuli. So they alternated from using the teaching techniques of pivotal response treatment with perceptive interest stimuli, and then with non-perceptive interest stimuli. They alternated between those, and collected data with the baseline and then with the results at the end. So like I mentioned, there were 3 young nonverbal children with autism in the study. So joint attention, what is it? And I'll give a minute for people to think about that. And so joint attention refers to the capacity of children to coordinate attention among self, other, and an object or event to share an interest or an experience. That was a definition I found. My thoughts were that I would imagine to be a parent of and have a child who's on the spectrum. This would be a very difficult aspect to having a child on the spectrum, and a skill you would certainly want your child to master, that joint attention, so that you can share interests and share experiences and have that social connection. Furthermore, children learn most of their first words during the joint interactions with objects and adults. And children with autism are certainly capable of producing joint attention, but as we'll go into more detail in this presentation, they often lack the social motivation to share their interests with others. So this study is focusing on ways to teach and reinforce the skill of sharing the interest with others. The importance of joint attention, as I touched on, this facilitates in the language development, as children learn most of their first words during the interactions with the joint tension between objects and adults. We'll point at something and the adult will say the word, and there's that joint attention of that object, and then also the language acquisition. It also helps children understand how to act in the social world. Joint attention can help children interpret the perspective of others, and it can help children to participate in the back and forth nature of social exchanges. So there's certainly a major importance in the lifelong success and happiness of the individual through learning the skill of joint attention at a young age. So for a typically developing child, joint attention behavior, what do you guys think that would look like? So similar to kind of what I was just mentioning about pointing at an object and having that social interaction, learning the words and the language acquisition. Typically developing children, they first learn to engage in joint attention by following the line of visual regard of the social partner. So for instance, if a dad is watching the front door, when he sees the car pull in the driveway waiting for the mother to walk through the door, the child will learn that joint attention by following that line of sight of the father looking towards the front door. By the end of the first year of life, they're capable of initiating episodes of joint attention with eye contact and gestures, pointing, sharing an experience of an interesting object or event with another person. So children with autism, in general, young children with autism initiate fewer joint attention behaviors, so there's less looking and pointing than their typically developing peers, and they do not respond consistently to the adult's attempts to elicit this joint attention. So as we've talked about, children on the spectrum struggle with joint attention behaviors, and it's even more of a struggle and more in depth to create the initiation of joint behavior. And we'll discuss the reasons why. So through this study, they were looking at the ways to teach joint attention. There's been a lot of evidence pointing towards the use of naturalistic motivational procedures. Specifically, this article goes into the pivotal response treatment, and then the use of highly preferred materials, activities, toys, and learning opportunities that can increase the child's intrinsic motivation to participate in the social interactions. So finding some sort of motivator with the student, making sure that you're always doing a preference assessment, ensuring that motivator is still consistent and not hasn't been exhausted by the child. So then to initiating joint attention, this is compared to responding to joint attention may present specific challenges to children with autism because of the greater social motivation necessary to elicit expressions of positive effect about an object or interest. So take that very specific paragraph and break it down. I believe what that's saying is that requesting behavior is a joint attention, just requesting a behavior. This may be unimpaired as there's an immediate reward of obtaining that requested object. But for the initiating of joint attention, the reward is the social sharing, and this is often less reinforcing for individuals who are on the autism spectrum. So the definition of initiating joint attention for this study, the definition that they utilized, was verbal and nonverbal initiation by the child and used to direct the caregiver's attention to an object, event, or topic of communicative act. So the participants in the study, there were 3 children with autism and their primary caregivers. A few of them was parents. Child 1, 34 months at the time of the study, This child is nonverbal. This child 1 seemed overly interested in letters and numbers and preferred to play alone with toys and activities involving the theme of letters and numbers. He showed an excessive interest in lining up magnetic letters and numbers. Child 2 was 26 months old. He did 10 different words in his vocabulary and also indicated an excessive interest in the numbers and letters. And the final child, child 3, was 38 months old at the beginning of the study. He utilized fewer than 10 words in his vocabulary, and he also played exclusively with toys and games that included letters and numbers. And so the stimuli that was utilized in the study, they were looking at 2 different kind of groups. So the perseverative interest stimuli and the non-perseverative interest stimuli. And so for the interest with the letters and numbers across the board with the 3 individuals, the perceptive interests that they utilized were they had an ABC and a 1, 2, 3 book, an ABC puzzle, transportation puzzle, magnetic letterboard. There was a twister game using letters and numbers, and Uno. For the non-perseverative interest, which they also utilized in the study, they had a storybook. It was called Helping Hector, Caribou, Don't Break the Ice, Twister, Connect 4, and Bowling. The pivotal response treatment intervention that was utilized occurred for 12 weeks, in which the authors trained the caregivers and parents on the teaching steps of pivotal response treatment. There were 6 strategies that they taught in order to motivate the individuals with autism. So I'm going to kind of throw it on you guys and see if you can come up with 2 strategies that you would think would help motivate a child with autism. And so the 6 strategies that they taught was following a child's lead and interest in choice of stimulus materials, interspersing maintenance, so previously mastered tasks and acquisition of newer tasks, so making sure that they're succeeding at times and then learning a new skill, consistently varying tasks to maintain the child's interest. So I think that's continually making sure that the stimuli hasn't been exhausted, reinforcing correct responses, as well as reinforcing reasonable attempts made by the child, administering rewards immediately and contingently following the child's demonstration of the target behavior. So, for example, if there was a verbalization, that there would be an immediate reward. And the final one is providing direct and natural reinforcers that relate to the child's response. So, for example, if a child was pointing to a puzzle, it was one of their perseverative interests, pointing to the ABC puzzle, and made an appropriate vocalization, so saying pa, pa, trying to get the word puzzle out, the child was immediately rewarded with the opportunity to play with that puzzle. And so, as I mentioned, there were 2 conditions. There was a perseverative interest stimuli condition and the non-perseverative. So for the perseverative interest, all 3 of the children received 10 hours of intervention in which the perseverative interest stimuli was utilized within those 6 teaching strategies. For the non-perseverative, all 3 participants similarly received 10 hours of intervention in which the non-perseverative interest stimuli was utilized with those 6 teaching strategies. And then, so they did one of each. They were doing the non-perseverative and the perseverative, and then they alternated. This is the final condition in which the perseverative interest was interspersed with that non-perseverative stimuli within the intervention session. They did a baseline collection of data and then a collection of data throughout, and at the end, they were collecting the number of joint attention initiations, the contingencies to joint attention initiations, and the qualitative measures of the interaction between the child and the caregiver. So the results at the end of the study indicated an immediate increase in joint intention initiations when perseverative or highly preferred interests were incorporated within the motivational techniques of the pivotal response training. Additional findings included collateral increases in joint intention initiations towards less preferred interests as well, and improvements between the interaction between the child and caregivers. So going into this, I kind of expected that there would be an increase in initiations when perseverative interests were utilized. I was surprised to see that there was an increase in joint intention initiations towards less preferred interest, and just an improvement of the interaction between child and caregiver. So that was really cool. And ultimately, the study empirically kind of suggests a functional relationship between the dependent factors, which are the number of joint intention initiations, and the independent factor of using perseverative interests to elicit the joint attention behaviors. So the implications for practice in early childhood setting, to take this study and now apply it directly. Personally, I don't work in the early childhood setting. I run a program for 18 to 21-year-old students, so I'm kind of on the other end of the spectrum there. However, I certainly still see the social deficits of some of my students, and I think could utilize a lot of these aspects. So from what I'm taking from the article, I think I'm going to apply it directly to my position with the 18 and 21-year-old students to increase the social joy that can come for these students, and certainly the initiation of joint attention goes far beyond just the social aspects for them. I think it connects to jobs, to leisure activities, to post-secondary education. I mean, social skills are just such a fundamental piece to surviving in this world. So I'd certainly be taking some of these practices, and I think they certainly apply to the early childhood setting as well. And you can see the imperative nature to begin at a young age working on these skills, utilizing the pivotal response treatment with perseverative interest, and utilizing that as a reinforcer for that joint attention behavior. And I think this will impact my practice and applying what I've learned and what I'm going to do differently. I think it's going to be imperative just to really get to know every single child and every single student as an individual, and learn what their interests are, what are their perseverative interests, and really building upon those perseverative interests. They're ultimately effective in engaging the child in interaction and tapping into his or her motivation to share interesting objects and events with other people. So encouraging that, of finding those perseverative interests and encouraging the child to share those objects and those events with other people. Certainly we'll utilize the 6 teaching strategies and the pivotal response training of following a child's lead and interests and choice of stimulus materials, interspersing maintenance, so the previously mastered tasks, and then acquisition, so any new tasks that are being applied, consistently varying the tasks to maintain the child's interests, reinforcing correct responses, in addition to reasonable attempts made by the child, administering rewards immediately and contingently following the child's demonstration of the target behavior, and then provide direct and natural reinforcers that relate to the child's response. So I will utilize those 6 teaching strategies within the incorporation of the perseverative interest. And I think it's going to certainly impact my practice for individuals and for the group of students that I work with. And yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. I highly recommend the article. It's really good. I enjoyed it. And yeah, thank you. Sorry I couldn't get Morgan Freeman's voice.